Hello everyone. Being that it's a few days before Purim, and tomorrow morning begins the fast of Esther, so happy Purim to everyone. A Pre-Purim Workshop called Functional and Dysfunctional Joy. I want to dedicate the class to a freshly departed soul, a mother of 8 children, 37 years old, a niece of mine, Rasha Lieberman Minkwitz. Was also a Chabad shlucha in Alpharetta, Georgia. Just passed away tragically last night. So, of course, in a month of joy, when you have tragedy is only more pronounced. So I'll dedicate the class to her. Matter of fact, she just had emailed me last week that she became addicted to these classes. She would sit in Alpharetta and take notes Wednesday night as she listened to the classes. So we've also lost a listener and a viewer. But obviously that's pales in comparison. So I'll dedicate these words of Torah to her, and may her family be consoled, her parents, her children. And but yet it's still the month of joy. The Mishnah says, the Talmud says, that when Adar enters, we increase in joy, not just for Purim, but from the beginning of the month, because the entire month of Adar, this entire month, not just the days of Purim, in the Megillah, which is the scroll, the text we read, in the book of Esther on Purim, which will be this Sunday, we talk about HaChodesh HaShenepach Le'am, the month that was transformed from what? From pain and from grief, Miyagan L'Simcha, to joy. Because Purim's joy wasn't just a joy that came out of nowhere, it was a joy that came out of transformation. That we were literally, the Jewish people were at the brink of the abyss, where the entire nation was about to be obliterated, decimated. And in this month, things turned around, and then we celebrate Purim. So Purim is a transformational holiday in that sense, which is, of course, befitting any type of sad episode. That every sadness, I remember once receiving an email from someone who had suffered a great tragedy at a young age. She wrote in the end of the email, she writes that in the end, all will be good. If it's not good, that means it's not yet the end. Which is a very powerful way to capture the way the Jews look in general at all life situations. That even though at the moment things can be extremely painful or dark and dismal, like it was right after the Holocaust, yet there's a bigger picture, and ultimately the end things will be good. But still, we still want to have a good that is good all the time, not just waiting for the end. So Purim is a reminder of the light that comes from darkness. At the end of the Megillah, when we read the book of Esther, but for the Jews it was simcha, sasan, joy and celebration, and 4 different terms are used. So may everyone only celebrate all the time, and even if there are moments of darkness, may they be transformed into light as well. A perfect segue into the topic of joy, functional, dysfunctional joy. So let's begin with the following, saying everybody wants to be happy. Would you agree? Have you ever met a person on earth that doesn't want to be happy? Some feel they may not find happiness as much as they want it, or they are doomed, or whatever it may be. But everybody wants to be happy. I'll take a step further. We'll say everybody deserves to be happy. That's the Torah Jewish way of thinking. God created the universe for a purpose, sent each of us down to this earth, a soul inside of a body, not to cause us to suffer, but to find a measure of satisfaction. That doesn't mean life doesn't have challenges, as we shall soon discuss. It just means the goal is not to suffer, the goal is to be happy. And yet we find how elusive is happiness for most people. As much as people want it, as much as people deserve it, still remains a very elusive experience. And even for those that experience it somewhat, for some to maintain it, sustainable happiness, sustainable satisfaction is even more rare. So I want to talk about this topic because, as I said, we're in a month of happiness, a month of joy, and to glean some fascinating insights from this month of Adar, from the story of Purim, that we can actually actualize and internalize in our lives. And some of these ideas and teachings, I would say all of them, are quite fascinating and surprising once you dig deeper in understanding and appreciating the message. But like everything, to really appreciate something, it's always important to put it into context. Because sometimes someone can explain to you a great idea, but if you don't see it in context of other ideas, you may not even appreciate its magnitude. When you can compare it to another model or to another theory, then you can say, oh wow, compared to that, I really appreciate this. The contrast is critical in especially appreciating subtle ideas and new ideas. So the topic of satisfaction, happiness, joy, for all practical purposes, we'll say they're pretty synonymous in our discussion here. What do most of us do to try to find happiness? We do whatever we either were trained or we picked up in our trial and error, in our experiences to do. As children, we learn from from our parents and from educators and from the media and our peers, the things the ways we make ourselves happy, entertaining ourselves, playing toys, games, whatever it is at that particular age. As we grow older, we continue the same pattern, except the objects of what make us happy may change. Well, they always change. Like when you're 2-3 years old, you may be playing with a certain little toy. When you're 20-30 years old, you're not playing with that type of toy, you have a different type of toy. Doesn't mean you aren't playing, it just means it's a different type of toy, usually a little more sophisticated, a little more mature. It doesn't mean you're more mature, it just means you're playing with a little more mature type of toy, so to speak. But so when people say, what do you do to make yourself happy? What do you do to make yourself content, satisfied? So we have a whole litany of a whole list of things. This can come down to things we eat, things that we entertain ourselves, traveling, reading, personal pleasures. Obviously, you got to put into the list of the usual suspects, different forms of how we experience sexuality, intimacy, and the list goes on. And everybody's got their list. Now, if you were to create 2 columns and say, here are the things you do to find some type of gratification, some type of happiness, some type of satisfaction, and you make column 2, and you'd say, how long do these last, the things you do? An hour, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, 30 seconds, a day, a month, a year. It would be interesting to see how many of the things that we pleasure ourselves with, how long they last. How enduring are they? How fast do you have to go back for another fix, so to speak, for a new dose? That would be like column 2. And column 3 perhaps would be what type of delight or pleasure or satisfaction is it? Is it of a physical nature? Is it of a emotional nature, intellectual nature, spiritual nature? So why am I saying making lists? Because often we don't even know ourselves how much we're trapped in our own habits until you literally write it down and suddenly say, hey, this is what I do. You see this is used on people to get people to go on diets or other type of breaking any type of addictions. You need to be aware of what you're doing because you minimize it. If you start counting your calories, or you start counting or listing what you've eaten today, and every time you put something in your mouth, you look at the end of the day, you'd be quite surprised. When you're doing it, you minimize. You say, okay, I have a little cookie here, a little cookie there. I should know. I'm a master of this art. And many of us are. When you're forced to write it down and to list it, what happens is you begin to become aware. To use the famous expression I often use here is Yediyas hamach lechetzi refuah. Knowing the problem is half a cure. So awareness of your own patterns, awareness of your own actions. And this is also true in the area of satisfaction and pleasure. Now, once you begin to list it this way, guaranteed, you're going to find that most of the things you do are pretty temporary. It shouldn't be shocking or surprising. The reason for that is because we live in a temporary world. Everything in this world is almost everything we do is impermanent. Permanence and something that lasts, that's sustainable, is rare in every area of life, including the things that cause us satisfaction, joy, and happiness. And we live in a very materialistic world which is by definition, as I said, impermanent. The food you eat. So let's say you love a certain restaurant, or a certain wine, or a certain meal, or a certain cheese, or whatever it is. I mean, by definition, food can't last. So you eat it. You could savor it. You know, they could teach you to keep it in your mouth for a little longer than most people do, and get every flavor it tastes. But there's some point you can't keep it there. It's got to move, because that's the nature of it. And then it enters into your system. It's digested. Some of it will be eliminated. Some of it will be integrated, and then if you want another pleasure, you're going to have to do it again. And the memory is not enough. So almost all physical pleasures, I say almost simply because I haven't gone through the list, but I would say all physical pleasures, just like as physicality itself is impermanent, the pleasure that it produces is impermanent. I remember reading, high school, Isaac Asimov. I first read scientific theory. So one of the interesting ways of describing science was the idea of efficiency. What does that mean? That once upon a time, it took, let's say, 7-8 hours a day to toil in the field to yield a certain amount of produce that you can consume in a meal. Then, when what was it that was first discovered? The agricultural, I forgot the name of it. What was the tool that became cotton gin is one, but there was another tool. Tools that began to allow to produce the same amount of produce for less amount of time, which is essentially the definition of technology: getting the same result in a less amount of investment of time and energy. So now you could just press a button. You don't even have to go there. Now you could just trade for the food. Buy it. So he described science as the progress of how much is invested and what you yield. So once upon a time, you would, let's say, invest 8 hours to get a yield of 1 hour of value. Today's the other way around. 1 hour of work could get you 8 hours of value, if not more. I remember when I read it the first time, I asked my mother, I think. I said, so how long does it take to cook a good meal in the kitchen? A few hours. How long does it take to eat it? A few minutes. A half hour. How long already? So I thought of it being like a very inefficient type of thing. Here, you're consuming something that takes you so many hours to prepare. The consumption is so short. Now, of course, people will begin to explain there's the whole culinary experience. Cooking is an art. It's not just preparing food. It's in itself an art, and people have pleasure doing it. Point I'm making here is, however you twist it, there's a certain temporariness and impermanence to it all. Now, money gives many people pleasure just by making it. Some people have pleasure making it and not spending it, which is itself a nice, interesting human oddity. You know, look in the animal kingdom, or in nature, that would be considered very odd and very neurotic, and bizarre, frankly. Not to benefit from that which you have earned. When animals go hunting, they hunt, and then they eat. Imagine they would just start saving it all over the place and hoarding it in bank accounts and so on. Okay, but humans have found their own way of understanding. Maybe we're trying to create an illusion of permanence by saying I have a big bank account and money is making money and it's accumulating. At the end of the day, it accumulates, it's very nice, but you don't. And one day, when you leave this earth after 120 years, you can't take any of it with you. So, that's another discussion, not for now, of how money creates a distortion, that you want to create eternity out of something that has no eternal element to it. And the list goes on. Now let's go to a higher level of pleasure. You know, there's Maslow's pyramid, where he talks about different levels of where there's basic survival needs. But then we move to, let's say, pleasure that comes from friendships, from relationships, from romance, from love, family. Okay, these pleasures, if you think about them, they're far more permanent. They're not so temporary, because here you're talking about the love of a child, or the love of a parent, or the love of spouses. So the love is something that does last, can last a lifetime, and can last even when you don't see the person. You can love someone millions of miles away. So when it comes to this, you could say this is a joy or a satisfaction that does have a deeper level of permanence. But as you see immediately, in direct disproportion to the fact that it doesn't have any physicality to it. That love may manifest in a physical way. You may hug, embrace, kiss someone you love, but that's an expression. The love itself is far more ethereal than the satisfaction you get from anything physical. So you could say that in direct proportion to what is the thing you love will be how long it lasts. If it's of a physical nature, it will last shorter. If it's of a spiritual or ethereal nature, it will last longer. Why am I saying all of this? Because this is meant to create contrast, to try to identify what brings us joy. Now, I know some people tell me, more than some, there's many, that they're addicted to their television show that they watch every Monday night at 10 p.m., at 9 p.m., at 8 p.m., whatever it is. And when all else fails, all day they wait for that. And even when their day is going well, you have 8 o'clock, I know I'm going to get that thrill. And you say to yourself, okay, what kind of value does that have? Okay, you could say it's a television show or some other so-called hourly hour of entertainment. Is it destructive? Let's say it's not a show that necessarily is in any way damaging or unhealthy. But the idea that being fixated by something that's going to entertain you like that, if you think about it as an outsider, you have to wonder what it really does for you. Is it like somewhat of a drug? So it's not a drug that you're ingesting in the sense that it can physically debilitate you or hurt you. It's not a drug necessarily that you're even addicted to in any physical sense. But nevertheless, it's like living vicariously and living superficially through something else. So of course the counter-argument will be is that we're human beings and we need stimulation coming from outside of us. We can't just constantly self-generate stimulation. What's wrong with getting stimulated from something? It's a good argument, and I'm not arguing against it. I'm just trying to spell out the spectrum of different things that entertain us and that give us joy. And most importantly, if your joy is exclusively coming from outside stimulation and coming from things that are other people's lives, not your own, then, yes, that bodes trouble. If you have something from within and you also get stimulation from outside, it's a whole different story. So we're talking now about dysfunctional love. Joy. Obviously, in the month of Adar, we're focusing on a functional type of joy. What does dysfunctional joy mean? Dysfunctional joy means that you may be happy, but it's not a healthy one. It's not healthy. It's filled with all kinds of forces that will ultimately undermine you as a person. For example, there's a psychological concept of being a pleaser. Some people grow up in certain homes, and for whatever reason, either because their parents are very dominating, or the fear of God has been driven into them, they become pleasers. What's a pleaser? They're always looking to please somebody. And to the point when you watch it from the outside, it can be quite pathetic. They always don't want to rock the boat, are terrified of confrontation, they always want to please. It often is associated with parents who created that type of demand. It's usually not natural to someone, and great deep resentment gets built up from it. But there are people that way. You have also people that express the opposite. They're not pleasers, they're always confrontational, they're always looking to start a fight. But a pleaser, even though maybe more pleasant looking, is equally problematic. A pleaser is not going to have a good situation because their own voice is never expressed. They're always satisfying or pleasing another. You'll sometimes see it to the extreme. People will say thank you 1,000 times a minute or an hour. There are people who will avoid by all means to have an opinion, and they become very almost like neutral. Like I know it was a guy I knew that he was dating for a long time, unable, very put together in many ways, but he had the pleaser element. And I remember once meeting him and the girlfriend that he was dating, and she basically said very bluntly, he's like asexual. He has he's such a goody-goody, I never see any trouble from him. Who's interested in a guy like that? He's so neutral, it's like vanilla. Needs something colorful, And it was clearly not his only natural state, because we all have times where we're a little agitated, where we're a little unpredictable, where it's not all perfect. But he was bending over backwards to be a pleaser because That's what made him thrive, I guess, and that's how he survived in a very unhealthy home. So here, everything seems good. He's pleasing people. They're happy with him. There seems to be joy, but it's frankly completely dysfunctional. It's an example of dysfunctional joy. And there are other forms of it as well. You'll see people who party a lot. And take away the drink from them and let them just stand on their own feet without any shield, without any protection, and they suddenly lose their ability to party. I once went to a party like that, and I saw a guy who I always saw, he always has a cup in his hand and a drink. So I challenged him. I said to him, do you think you could go to a party without a cup in your hand? Yeah, sure. I'm just holding it. So I said, let's see. He puts down the cup. Within 5 minutes, I saw he could not find himself. That was his way. He means he's like in action mode. People see him that way. That was his persona. So look, it looks like a very joyful experience, but it's not about you. Now, you could say, is that destructive in that? I don't know if there's anything destructive, but it definitely does not. It is not conducive for developing a healthy, honest relationship. A lot of partying in general. People go to parties and are very extroverts and socialize. Some of it is escape, frankly. It's escape from having to look at yourself. So you're always at another party. You always find something to distract yourself. They say a thief, for example, can't afford to be quiet because he's guilty inside. So when he meets you, he can't just be quiet because he's not comfortable with silence. Too awkward. So he's always saying something. You meet people, they always have to say something. People who are very secure and calm within, have real inner joy, healthy joy, they can sit, they don't have to say anything. Some people always have to you have to always hear something from them. Just using examples of two types of joyful experiences. So you can really classify it like this almost. You could say, you could say some people have self-confidence. You could think self-confidence is very much direct. You may think it's not connected to joy or happiness. It's completely connected to. Because someone who has self-confidence has no reason not to be happy. Happiness, therefore, can be defined both as a verb, it can be defined as a noun. You can see happiness as a state of being. I'm a happy person. And there are people who are happy when they do happy things. And it's very, very different, this two. I want to discuss this similarly in the context of a person who does good things and a good person. So I explained there are people who do good things. When they do good things, they're good. But they're not necessarily good people. It's not 24/7. It's not when it's inconvenient for them. And I remember one of those classes where I discussed this. I remember we were downtown then. So a guy came over to me and said to me, tonight, Rabbi, you have answered a question that's been bothering me for decades. He told me that his father was a big philanthropist, very kind man, very giving. He says, I remember Tuesday nights, anyone that came to our door was allowed in and would not go away unsatisfied. Whether it was a loan, a job, a donation, a favor, some help. That was my father. But should you have come to him on Wednesday night, when he had his poker game with his few friends, nobody was allowed in then. And I always wondered, on one hand, I was very proud of my father's kindness. But on the other hand, there was also a part of him that wasn't so kind. Didn't always treat my mother well, us well. And tonight you answered the question. My father did good things. He wasn't necessarily a good man. Maybe it made him feel good Tuesday night to be giving. So I give him all the credit for it. That's great. But maybe this was something he inherited from his father. It's like a tradition. Because if he was really a good person, then why not Wednesday night? And why not when it's inconvenient? Why is it only on his terms? And he's 100% right. There's two ways we can experience things. It's either a verb or a noun. You can do certain things, and while you're doing it, it can manifest in a very nice way. And I'm not taking away, like this guy said, I'm not taking away credit for my father's good stuff. But there's another thing, being a good person is a 24/7 thing. It's your being. Someone wakes you up in the middle of the night, they touch you, it'll still come goodness. No matter when it will be, not only on your terms. And the same thing is with joy. There's things you can do while you're doing them that make you very happy. They're very satisfying. But that necessarily doesn't mean a joyous person. A joyful person is joyous, something? Even when they're sad. Which sounds like odd. No, it's not. Think about it for a moment. Because you think, okay, if joy was a verb, while you're joyous, when you're not, you're not. But if you're a happy person fundamentally, from the core, you have that self-confidence. So yes, there are times there can be a tragedy. There are times there can be sad events. And you will cry. You will feel sad. But you're still the same happy person internally. It's just at that moment, it's not manifesting in dancing and singing and celebrating that way. It's manifesting in being honest to the moment and be truthful to a sad experience, which demands and deserves to be cried over and not to ignore. Someone who's so oblivious to sadness is not a happy person. That's just someone who can't handle sadness. So maybe the only way they handle it is by completely denying it and escaping. A person who's really secure and has that sense of joy in the center, sometimes that joy manifests in very, very happy ways. But even when there's a sadness in them, the joy doesn't go away. There's an expression in the Zohar that says joy on one side of the heart, sadness in the other. Meaning there are times where this way and times that way, but it's really coming at the core. You're talking about a confident and secure person who experiences to their fullest. So that gives you a whole new take on joy. It's not about doing things that are happy. This is something which is far lesser, let's call it a rarer commodity in our times. To be able to achieve, to acquire that type of inner joy that is always there with you. Take children, for example. My favorite example is always children. Because it's the purest form of ourselves. Before they've been jaded and corrupted by the toxins of our society. So look at children. Children, except on rare occasions, are born happy. They're born bubbly. They're excited. They smile, and so on. Then suddenly they say a child is hungry, or a child is tired, or a child is in pain. They start crying. So think a second. And you suddenly say, okay, the child was happy, now the child is sad. That's a very superficial take. The child is happy all the time. The sadness is for a moment and for a reason. What's the reason? He's uncomfortable, or she. She's hungry, she's tired, she's in pain, she's illness, cold. But you're not going to say suddenly the child has changed personality. It's a different manifestation. A healthy child, when something is bothering them, they're going to cry. That doesn't take away from the fact that they were bubbling a moment before and they'll be bubbling a moment afterwards. It's all part of the same child. That child is naturally a content person, content human being, ready to take on anything, any challenge. At the same time, there are moments that there may be a sad moment because that's what the moment warrants. You understand the difference? And there's a very critical difference. In our society, in our way of looking at things, when you look at things superficially, you see somebody, you say, hey, this person is looking sad. You say, oh, he must be a sad person. That's a big jump. Not necessarily. Because just like some other person may be looking happy, and you say it's a happy person, then you find out that person is just putting on a fake smile. You know, they used to talk about the clown. The clown is the most tragic figure. Dresses like a clown, even paints a smile on his face, and he may be crying inside. You know, clowns of old, they used to say, were really tragic figures that lived the life of a clown, was a way of masquerading. I remember when I was, a long time ago, I don't know if any of you ever saw this, there was a silent film called He Who Gets Slapped. And then there was a book written based on it. He Who Gets Slapped, that was the name of it. I'll just tell you briefly the plot. I don't know if you ever liked silent movies. So the story is like this. He who gets slapped, he is the name of a clown who calls himself he. So he's a character, and he entertains the public. So the story begins with this clown called He Who Gets Slapped, and the favorite act that everybody loves is when this clown starts getting slapped by all the other clowns. So you have all the other clowns, and there's a point in the act, and the one gives him a slap, another slap, and the whole place is roaring, the whole audience, slap. Give him another slap, give him another slap. So he acquired the name He Who Gets Slapped. But there's a story behind the story. And the story unfolds a tragic story of a big professor who was working for his lifetime achievement of discovering some major new scientific breakthrough. And he had a baron that was his sponsor. But he worked so hard, he would work days and nights, completely lost sight of his life. And the baron began to have an affair with his wife, and which was bad enough. But even worse, that big night when he was supposed to come and present his great paper, he got very ill because he had not slept at nights and he was working so hard. So, being that he trusted the Baron, he said to the Baron, "Why don't you present my paper for me?" The Baron says, "Okay." He's lying delirious in bed. The Baron goes and starts presenting the paper. But the professor can't bring himself to miss such a night. So suddenly crawls out of bed, and he's like not well. So he's not looking well and so on, haggard and all that. And he comes to the big academy, the hall. He sees the Baron standing up there, and he's reading the paper. And the place is oohing and eyeing. They're amazed, such a paper, such like Einsteinian proportions. Is that an expression? Why not? Of his revelations. And the professor is standing in the back of the hall and enjoying it. And he's waiting to hear, as he's about to finish, is he gonna, he's waiting to hear that he's gonna say that this is a paper from this professor. Well, he forgets that he omits that little credit. He so got caught up in adulation, the Baron, that he made believe it was his own paper. The professor, meanwhile, moves his way up, and as I said, he was tired, he was sick, and he's moving up, and he's like shaking. And everyone's looking at him. Who are you? Who's this guy? He goes up to the Baron and tells the Baron, tell them who wrote this paper. And the Baron looks at him with this condescending eye. And everyone's waiting to see what he say. Baron, tell them who wrote this paper. And the Baron takes his hand and gives him a slap across the face. Take this derelict, this crackpot out of here. And everything is still taken from his wife, his possessions, even his idea. So the guy goes into exile, calls himself the clown, he who gets slapped. I mean, there's a whole ending, there's a whole story, but just that part. So you never know when a clown is smiling what's really going on behind the scenes. So he basically made it the act of his own life and society, how unfair society is. And the crowds love it. He's entertaining them. They love to see someone get slapped and beat up. But he was basically reenacting what had happened to him. Pretty sad, right? Shed a tear for the professor. So the point I want to go back to is that we do not see, and we live in a superficial level, joy, satisfaction, pain, all these things are what we see. But the truth is, what you see is not what you get. We live in a world that the surface does not reflect what's beneath the surface. If we thought so, imagine where we would be today. If you looked at the surface of the sea, for example, the ocean, and you had no idea what's going on beneath the surface, what would we know? Not only would we know nothing, we'd be distorted into thinking there's nothing there. You'd see once in a while a fish jump out. You'd see a fin. Now we know with the cameras and going under the water that there's more complex life under the sea than on land. Same with outer space. Same brimming in every molecule and cell of existence. Subatomic energy. But it's not obvious to the naked eye. To the naked eye, things look relatively calm, relatively simple. Beneath the surface is far from simple. And take the human being, this small 5-6 foot frame, weighs 100, 200 pounds, and what does it carry within us? Our brain, size of the palm of the hand, a little larger. What does it have? How much does it have in it? The positive stuff. And of course you add in all the demons and the haunting thoughts and feelings. So you don't need to be brilliant to understand that the surface reflects almost nothing, especially today. So the same is true when it comes to joy and happiness. If we're going to apply ourselves to it with a type of, if you're going to use tools that are superficial, you're going to get superficial joy. As I said earlier, the list of joy, things that bring you joy and happiness, that are all temporary. Because if you worship the temporary, your results will be temporary results. But if you're able to access a part of ourselves that is just naturally joyful all the time, even when we're not experiencing it, even when it's not being expressed, beneath the surface it's brimming with that energy. Like I said, the ocean, you could think, hey, it's quiet surface of the sea, but underneath it is full of life, teeming with life. The same thing is anything in existence. There's no such thing as dead world. There's no dead world. Even if we were all to leave this room and shut the lights, in every cell, in every, as I said, in every fiber of objects in this room is filled with energy. But we can't see it, we can't even experience it. But we know it's there. And when you tap into this, it releases tremendous amounts of force and power. So the same is true about ourselves. All we got to do is apply the same principle. Don't be deceived by your self-perception. Your self-perception is going to see only that which you have been trained to see. And it's usually only surface-like things. You don't see your own depth. You don't see your own potential. You may feel you have it. You may feel underappreciated. But what you live your life is usually based on what others are expecting of you, demanding of you, how you've learned to maneuver in this world. Comes the month of Adar and it's telling us, and this month of Adar, increase in joy. It's not just saying superimpose it upon yourself. It's your natural birthright. It's a whole state of being that you have within, and you once had it as a child. What happened? Why suddenly, where did you lose the natural happiness? As I said earlier, a child can cry also. Now, this doesn't mean that you're naive and don't see life has its challenges. But a challenge is not cause to make you into a bitter or a broken person. It's a challenge that needs to be overcome. The Jewish people as a whole captured this idea. There's no nation on the earth that celebrates like we do. But there's also no nation on earth that has suffered like we did. Why? Because our suffering never defined us. You can suffer and not become a sufferer. You transcended it. That doesn't mean we didn't suffer. It didn't mean we were in denial. But it meant we did not allow it to define us. And there's a verse in the Megillah that captures the reason why. It says, Haman rose to power and demanded that everyone bow to him. One man refused. Everyone bowed to him. Because he was a confidant of the king's. And if you were in good favor with him, you were in good favor with the king. So why not bow to him? Why not placate him, make him feel good, whatever it is? Buy him off. One man, Mordechai, he will not bow to him. He wouldn't even acknowledge him. Yichra v'yishtachve is a full prostration. Prostration, to prostrate yourself. And Yichra is like a bow. He wouldn't bow and he wouldn't prostrate himself. Why? Because as the verse says, we are servants of God, not servants of His servants. We don't worship men. We don't worship man-made things. We don't worship temporary things and impermanent things. Our joy comes from a connection to the eternal. And nothing can replace that. So yes, you may exist, but you're not my God. Which means that when the Jews suffered, they never allowed suffering. They also didn't worship their suffering. It's an interesting custom at a wedding ceremony, the chuppah. The end of the chuppah, the end of every ceremony, after all the blessings are said, so everyone knows, chuppah usually ends with the breaking of the glass. No, it's a custom. The breaking of the glass. Which has many reasons. It reminds us of the destruction of the temple, which is why some people will sing or say a prayer about the temple, the destruction of the temple. And there's other reasons. One thing is for sure, breaking a glass, it appears to be like a negative thing. You're breaking something. So there are also lessons that the glass should be broken, not the marriage. Or every time something breaks in your marriage, you should always say Mazel Tov, whatever the different humorous and serious anecdotes around. But at the end of the day, the question begs the following question. You're at a chuppah, it's the highest point of a person's life, of a couple's life. Afterwards, after the honeymoon, there may be a little more challenges. But usually at a wedding ceremony, even though frankly I've been to weddings, even the ceremony was fraught with politics and fights already. But in most cases, a wedding chuppah, it's the high point. It's the high point of a celebration. Why remind a couple? There'll be plenty of reminders in their lives that life isn't perfect. You have to go ahead and deliberately break a glass. There'll be plenty of times that they're going to break a glass, not so deliberate. So there's one fascinating psychological insight into this, and I'll preface it with another connection to, as I said, the class I'm dedicating to it. Even though we're in the month of Adar, joy, it's an interesting statement in the Talmud. It equates and says, just like when we enter the month of Av, the saddest month of the year, we should diminish in joy. So too, when we enter the month of Adar, we should increase in joy. Why are we equating the two? What's the so? Just as. I mean, it's a technical connection. Joy, here you diminish, here you increase. But why put them into one sentence? As if it's dependent on one another. And you can't increase in joy in Adar if you don't decrease in joy in Av. The Av is the month of Tisha B'Av, the saddest day of the Jewish calendar. Or vice versa. You can't diminish in joy through unless you increase. It's two separate things. Why do we have to be reminded when we're in the moment of joy about the diminishing in Av, in the sad month? And yet another question similar is brought into Jewish law. You know, we say Sheva Brachas by a wedding. We say seven blessings. Also Sheva Brachas, 7 days of celebration after a marriage. But there's another number 7. Very negative one. Shiva. Shiva, which means 7 as well. Sitting 7 days in grief and mourning over a loved one, as his family will be doing. But here's the interesting thing, another bizarre connection. It says Moses decreed 7 days of grief and 7 days of simcha, of joy. Here too, why bring these two together? It's two separate things. Death is death. Celebration is celebration. Marriage is marriage. Death is death. Two separate statements. Why do you have to say, just like there's 7 days of grief, there's 7 days of joy, 7 days of joy, 7 days? Why do we have to be reminded? Well, similar to the question with the breaking of the glass. And the answer is, my friends, has a profound psychological insight of how people survive, and also the nature of joy and the nature of grief. If you remember, I said earlier, with a child, people who are really happy, people are happy even when they're crying. Even when they have grief, there's an inner happiness. Doesn't mean they access it then. Doesn't mean it's revealed. So what's going on is the following. It's not about you. It's about the experience that you're going through. When a person is into themselves, so now I'm happy, it's about I am happy, and now I'm sad. A person like that will be both overcome by their happiness and indulge in it, a dysfunctional type of joy, and will also have a dysfunctional type of grief. Let me explain what I mean. When you remember by a chuppah, at the highest point of your joy, the highest point, marriage, you remember that the world is still a broken place, and there's some broken hearts and souls, and you have empathy, means that you're not so consumed with your joy that you forget everybody else. It means someone will come to you, even at your highest point, and you'll be able to see a broken-hearted person. Some people are so indulgent in their joy, they can't see anything. Because it's all about me. I'm now consumed in joy. What right do you have to come to rain on my party? What right do you have to come to somewhat weaken my celebration? Because it's about you. True joy is not about you. True joy is because the thing itself demands joy. A marriage is not just because one couple found their soulmate, because they're connecting and uniting all levels of existence. A marriage is a unity that even God himself celebrates, and all the world celebrates. It's not just about you. Since it's not just about you, so even at the high point, you remember another person. And what's the result of that? That God forbid, the day will come when you suffer, God forbid, a loss, a death, a grief. So since it's not completely about you, you also won't be completely overwhelmed and consumed by the loss. Just as you remembered the broken soul in your moment of joy, when you're completely broken, there's a moments of joy that are also remembered, and you're remembered. Because not all. It's like saying, I'm not 100%, even when I'm 100% celebrating, I reserve 1% that it's not just about me, there are other people. So then when you're suffering, it's also not 100%. There's one opening that gives you hope to get through it. And you'll see this. People who are consumed all the way with their own experience of something, if it's a great thing, then when it comes a bad thing, they're also completely all consumed and completely devastated. This was the secret of Jewish survival. That even when we were in the worst of times, there was always something we held on to, because it was not just about us. If it's all about you, then either you're completely consumed with it, or you're completely devastated by it. So think of it like another expression that says that a person should always be flexible like a reed and not hard like a cedar. Because when a storm strikes, which trees fall down? The ones that have no flexibility. The ones that stand strong and resist the wind. The ones that blow with the wind and bend in the wind are the ones that survive. Because they're not consumed with themselves. When you're a very powerful person, okay, great, when things are going well, but when there's a challenge, your strength becomes your liability. Think of a good swimmer. A good swimmer, what's a great swimmer? A great swimmer does not swim in every current and in every water. What happens is, if a storm strikes, a great swimmer will stop swimming. They'll let themselves be carried by the tide. They won't expend energy. Then when it calms down, that's when they'll make their forward move. Well, you'll see it always comes down to that. If you're it's all about you, then you will fall. Just like you rose by the sword, you fall by the sword. You ever see a suspension bridge? The fascinating architecture of a suspension bridge is such that when you walk on the bridge, you'll always see it shaking. I remember the first time we were in camp, they took us for a hike. So our counselor wanted to show us a feat of engineering, took us on a suspension bridge, and it was shaking. And he said, "What do you think?" So first initial reaction is, this is gonna collapse. Let's get off the bridge. He says, "No, that's the power of a suspension bridge. It can carry so much more weight because it goes with the flow. It does not stand strong. If it did not shake the measure amount, if it didn't sway, then what would happen is it would ultimately collapse when there was too much pressure. The suspension bridge, in its own feat of engineering, the way it's suspended, etc., because it has that flexibility, it can carry so much more weight." Now, it makes a lot of sense when you think about it. A lot of martial arts, especially from Far Eastern martial arts, are based on this principle. Not the power of the punch, but use the energy of the other person against them. Let them punch, and you ride on their energy. It's similar to what a good baseball hitter does. A fastball flies so fast, not because you're such a good hitter, it's because you're using the momentum and the speed of the pitch. Obviously, a powerful hitter will only make it more powerful. So energy is not always about how strong you act, it's how you go with the flow. The one who knows how to go with the flow will be able to overcome far more and achieve a lot more than someone who's just very rigid. So rigid may work when there's regular conditions, but when there's a storm and there's a force that fights you, then it's far wiser to go with the flow. So that's the story. Life is a cycle. And that's why the Torah equates grief and joy. Not because it's trying to remind us in times of joy, remember there's grief. It's reminding us of reality. Life is a cycle, like a Ferris wheel. Sometimes you're on top, sometimes you're on bottom, but it's one cycle. Don't think it's two different worlds. Now I'm happy and now I'm sad. It's one cycle. It's a cycle that is at its core a joyous one. But there are times when there's dips. And you have to understand that all part of the turn. The Baal Shem Tov uses an example of what's called Schwindeltreppe. In Yiddish, Schwindeltreppe means swindling steps. We call it a spiral staircase. So when you go on a regular staircase, you see a destination, many steps away, but it's there. When you go on a spiral staircase, what's unique? You can build a staircase in a much smaller space because it goes like this, right? And you go up, and when you make a 180-degree turn, you can't see the destination. In a regular staircase, you could always see the destination. But in a spiral staircase, as Baal Shem Tov explains, as you get closer to the destination, right before you reach the peak, you have to make a complete turn, and your back is to the peak, and you may say, "Hey, I'm never going to get there." And it's that moment that if you see it through, you'll reach the destination. Because you understand it's one staircase. It's still one staircase. It's just a deceptive one. That's why it's called a swindling staircase. It swindles you into thinking you're not making any move. You're not making any progress. This is what life is about. So this is what it says. That's why the Gemara says, just as we decrease in joy in Av, we increase in Adar. Just as we celebrate the 7 days of marriage, we honor the 7 days of Shiva, of mourning, to tell us that life is a cycle. And when you know it as a cycle, nothing overcomes you, because even the deepest mourning also has another side of the spectrum, which is deep, deep joy. And it's joy that's ultimately the real natural state of affairs. And that's why by a chuppah, that's what we do. We break a glass. It's not a reminder just to say, okay, get you out of the mode of happiness, let's remember the destruction. It's telling you that it's all part of one cycle. The destruction was meant to bring you to this joy, and this joy is part of a process that until the world is perfect, we'll still have to go through another cycle perhaps of breaking. And in all situations, always remember that there's more to the picture. Never become so arrogant and so self-consumed with your experience. Not in joy and not in pain. So the big bottom line is, it's not about you. You're focusing on a higher element. So here comes the month of Adar, says add in joy, increase in joy. You'll say, one second, I'm not in the mood. Who's asking you? We're not talking about you. Joy is now in the air. Joy is energy. It would be like you go to a party, someone's birthday party. You say, I'm not in the mood. But this is a person you love. Get in the mood. We are so consumed with our moods. We say, hey, I'm not there. I got to express my voice. I'm sad. So I'm coming to a party. I'm going to make sure everyone else is miserable. That's not self-expression. That's selfishness. That borders on probably a lot of insecurity. Why does everyone have to be sad because you are? Maybe the other way around. Maybe don't take yourself so seriously. Someone else is celebrating. Maybe you can forget about yourself for a few minutes and celebrate. Just celebrate someone else's celebration. It's a healthy exercise to sometimes get out of your own way. It's not something we often hear, because today everyone is talking about validating. I understand. I'm not talking about annihilating yourself. We're talking about also. So validating means if I'm in a bad mood, everyone's got to be in a bad mood. No. There's also a thing called bittul, healthy bittul, where you recognize here's a situation. So you go, God forbid, into a sad situation. There's sadness. Yeah, maybe you should shed a tear, even if you're in a good mood. It's not a contradiction. I submit the reason we have problems is not because we're such individuals, because we're so insecure, and we've learned to be very superficial. Everything is what it is. Everything's more complicated. Every joy has another side to the coin. Every sadness has another side to the coin. And it's the people who know how to swim, the people who know how to go with that flow, that understand that cycle, are the people who are happy all the time. Now, I'm going to be going from here to a house of death. And trust me, it's not pleasant. But it's a family that is extremely healthy. And even in their deepest sadness, there's unbelievable happiness. No one can see it. And no one, even themselves, they don't see it. But when you know people, you know a person. This is a person who fundamentally knows why they're here on this earth. And they're not indulging in themselves. It's not about me. When you see that, and you see in contrast, how many people are involved just about me and my turf. Everything is, what am I going to do for myself? You see how they communicate. It's all about me. The classic narcissist is a compulsive narcissist. So there's two ways to recognize a narcissist. Very easy to expose a narcissist. And no narcissist can hide this. Even if they hear it, they can't stop it. That's what defines a narcissist. One way to see it is very simple. Within a conversation, within 2 minutes of the conversation, the word I is going to always pop up. I'll give you an example. You're having a conversation with somebody and you're talking about landing on the moon in 1969. Okay, so it's not about you, it's not about the other person. You're talking about landing on the moon. But within 2 minutes, the other person says, yeah, I know someone from NASA, I read this and that. Who's talking about you? We're not talking about you. They're unable to have an abstract conversation about an idea without me involved. And they don't even know it. I pointed this out sometimes to people that I know that are narcissists. And even when you say it, they don't even recognize. They say, no, I'm not saying I because of I. I'm saying I because I read it. I happened to read it. Anyway, but this is consistent. Try it out. You'll see. They just simply cannot. The second way to recognize narcissists is there's no conversation. If there's a disagreement, it's not like they hear you and they respond to you. They're like a good lawyer. They hear you. And then they rephrase what they're saying, thinking you're stupid and you didn't get it the first time. So let me explain it to you. There's never a conversation. There's never like a real, I heard what you said and now let me respond differently. They have their mantra, and by hook or by crook, they're going to repeat it 65 times. And I've seen this also. It's almost pathetic for what is so sad. It's a comedy. I see sometimes people that say, and I see I say, so you think I didn't get what you said? They don't want to say that, so they say, maybe I didn't explain myself well, so let me say it again. And they really so sure that impossible they should be wrong. I must not get what they're saying. And this is what is the second sign. There's no conversation. You keep going back and forth, and you can test it. Try to throw in a loop, throw in a monkey wrench into the idea, like take it elsewhere, and you'll see they'll just bring it back to their agenda. Anyway, a type of so-called spontaneity of really being able to, it's called cross-pollinating ideas is not usually possible. So narcissists are, thank God, they're common, but not, I wouldn't say everyone is that way. There are many people who've become narcissists, not necessarily by birth. I think is by their own insecurities and by living lives where they were around narcissists, so they've developed a personality. They think that's the only way to really be somebody is by me. Some will even tell you, you know something, that if you don't fight for yourself, no one else will, so they become completely consumed with that. But I have seen people, as I mentioned before, that are really secure. And those are the people that are a pleasure to be with. They think about you before they think about themselves. They have a conversation, you hear the sensitivity to another person. They're not about, I read that, I read this. And they're definitely not about just rephrasing their brilliant idea and bestowing it upon you and letting you feel that you're basking in the glow of their benevolence. You know, people who just have a natural selflessness, a natural care, natural way of being. So yes, tragedy happens and there's sadness, but there's a bigger picture. And the bigger picture is such that you see a bird's eye view and you see that there's two sides to the coin. Ultimately, we're told, like Purim celebrates, that every negative will be transformed to positive. But it came with an attitude. It didn't just happen. You know, Mordechai and Esther, they prayed. They went with a very positive attitude. They were confident that they could overcome any challenge. So it wasn't like they were sitting and depressed. If they were depressed and they said, look how terrible, we're all going to die tomorrow, we wouldn't have had the whole story. So it's an attitude. You ask yourself, how could they have had such presence of mind? You know, the whole Jewish people were on the line. Worse than Hitler. Hitler didn't have every Jew under his power. Thank God. Imagine Hitler, every Jew on earth would have been under his control. That's what the story was. Because their connection was a deeper one. Like the story with the previous Chabad Rebbe, when he was arrested, and he refused to cooperate, and they pointed a gun to his head. And one of his captors was a Jewish communist, who were the worst anti-Semites of them all. Said to him, Rebbe, this pistol has changed many people's mind. It caused many people to cooperate. And the Rebbe, without flinching, said to him, this toy can frighten someone who has one world and many gods, but not someone who has one God and many worlds. This wasn't just a line, you know. And it's not that the Rebbe was being frivolous about life and death. He could have been shot on the spot, but he was telling him a deep truth. You have one world and many gods. Yes, so for you, death is over. It's at the end. And every day you have another God. You have one God that's higher than existence, a God that's beyond the material, beyond physical life. And many worlds. You have a physical world, you have a spiritual world, you have another spiritual world. You have diversified, as they say, in investments. And your eggs are not all in one basket. Nothing can frighten a person like that. While he celebrated life, he wasn't looking to die, obviously. Jews do not celebrate death. But they're not afraid of it, because they're not defined by it. And that's what the Rebbe was saying. I'm not defined by your terms. You're not going to frighten me by the things that frighten you. You know? And it's a tremendous lesson. Now, not all of us are on that level. But on Purim, the same idea. Mordechai will not bow to Haman, which made no sense. Haman was in control. So give him a little bow. Throw him a bone, a token, whatever, a token acknowledgement. No. Who prevailed? It says in the Talmud, the grandchildren of Haman studying Torah in Bnei Brak. And the children of Mordechai prevailed. Mordechai prevailed. Who's here to talk about the story? I don't know about Haman's grandchildren and Achashverosh's grandchildren, though they were the great empire. Just like we're Hitler's grandchildren, or we're our Chmelnytsky's grandchildren, and all the others, rabid anti-Semites and murderers and so on. And even if they have grandchildren, they definitely don't want anyone to know. So what we have is a story of people who've suffered, but they have now become sufferers. Maintained our joy. Some say all sense of humor, especially in the Western world, comes from Jews. Seinfeld, Woody Allen, all these comedians, and so on. Some say there's a very thin line between joy and misery. joy and tragedy, comedy and tragedy. However you want to explain it, is because there is a cycle. And we're now in the cycle of joy, but it's not a cycle that forgets there was pain. It came out of it. And each of in our lives, even if things aren't going so well, the first thing you should say to yourself, I know this may sound strange, don't take yourself so seriously. I'm not saying that you deserve or that you should embrace being miserable, but not take yourself so seriously is a big first step. Because people who take themselves too seriously, even in good times, then when it comes bad times, they can't get out of it because it's all about me. Now, obviously, you don't say this to someone who's sitting shiva or is grieving. You don't go in and say, hey, listen, don't take yourself so seriously. Let's dance. Obviously not. That's ridiculous. So I want to make sure that that's not the impression I gave off. I'm saying it to ourselves, what you say to yourself, not what you say to someone. Someone else, always empathy. But to yourself, you have to ask yourself, and don't wait for a difficult moment. Be a reed. You go with the wind. Sometimes the wind is too powerful to just stand strong and say, I'm going to take it all. Today was not such a great day, so you yield a bit, and you adjust, and you move on to the next day. That's how it works. That's the people who really are the most successful. They take a liability, and they turn it into an asset. They take pressure, and they don't fight it. They let it mold them, shape them. That's what pressure does. So the negative times become parts of the positive as well. And they feed each other. This still doesn't mean that it's so easy to just deal with pain, obviously. And I'm not discussing that per se. I'm just describing that there's healthy joy and there's unhealthy. There's functional and dysfunctional. Dysfunctional joy is about me. I'm happy now I'm not happy. Functional joy is not about me. It's about the situation. Situation demands joy. You go to a wedding. You have a friend. Even if it's not a friend, a stranger, celebrating. The world is celebrating. You could also celebrate a little. Are you in such a bad mood? You know what? So your mood can wait, or your mood is not the most important thing on earth. Obviously, this needs to be qualified. There are times where we do need to address our own feelings and needs. And if you're in doubt, find an objective mentor. And you can wait and say, listen, am I taking myself too seriously? Or maybe I should address my issues and my feelings. So I'm not suggesting to completely ignore yourself is also not the objective. So, as we enter the Purim season, this year, because Purim is Sunday, and we don't fast on Shabbos, so Tainus Esther, the fast of Esther that always precedes the day before Purim, is on Thursday. So in a way, we have an extended holiday. So tomorrow's a fast. Usually when the fast ends, you read the Megillah. Now the fast ends, you just eat. So that's the good news. You don't have to wait for the Megillah reading. Then comes Friday. Then comes Shabbos, then comes Sunday. And here you also see two ends of the spectrum. Why are we fasting? Purim is such celebration. Fast is usually a sign of depriving yourself of eating, of joy, of pleasure, because joy always comes with the other side to it. The fast of Esther is what led to Purim. So we don't forget that. And today, the decree is gone. So why do we still have to remember the fasting? Because in the psychological terms, we have to always remember there's a picture here. And when you remember the sadder moments or the fasting, when you're celebrating, then when you're, God forbid, in a situation of a sad, you'll be remembered and you'll be able to also celebrate. So it's like always a balance. You always remember, even when good times, you remember that there were some sad times. And sad times will then remind you that there are good times. That's how it works, the cycle. So I want to wish everybody a very blessed and happy Purim. A Purim that you turn yourself inside out, upside down, topsy-turvy. Those in this world that need a consolation may be consoled in the fullest sense of the word. And I would only wish to celebrate. We should only celebrate simchas together with each other. If you need any assistance, where to go Purim, hear a Megillah, or any other Purim needs, please be in touch with us. We can recommend different shuls, synagogues, or communities. And it shouldn't just be Purim, but it should be a Simcha Dikki year for everyone. Those that have to find their soulmate and celebrate perfect timing. Celebrate that way. Maybe dance at your Simcha this year. And those that have already their soulmate need blessings for health, or parnasa, livelihood, or children, healthy children, We should only have revealed simchas all of these past. And again, dedicate the class to the sad passing of Rashi, the daughter of Sarah and Chaimer, and may they only have simchas, and may we only celebrate all the time. Philip will be giving his class tomorrow night, and Philip has also just married off his daughter, so we come from a big celebration on Simcha, which was this past Thursday night. And as I said again, may we only celebrate simchas. Thank you very much.